Okay, let me get out my sermon. See if I can work this way. I want to talk about trees today, obviously. You can tell I want to do that. Partly because it's Arbor Day, but there's a larger parable, symbol, analogy going on. And that's in part because I have a thing for trees myself, and it all goes back to a time when I was very young. I was not even 5, maybe I was just 5, and we were about to move from a townhouse apartment to a house because, well, my mom was pregnant with her 3rd child, and we were growing as a family. We needed more space. And in the apartment, the townhouse apartment complex where we lived at the time, you know what I mean, those long rows of townhouses that were separated occasionally by a little bit of greenery, and in a couple of corners there would be a playground, and there was a playground, and off in the corner of a playground was a tall pine tree. It was tall to me. I was 5. Maybe it was 30, 40 feet tall, and other kids that I played with climbed this tree all the time, but I was a stocky kid, not very self-confident, and so I never got up more than 1 or 2 branches before I felt a little uneasy. And so it came to be the day that we were about to leave, at least I remember it that way, and I realized that if I were going to climb that tree, it would have to be that day. And I knew no one else would be there because it was a little gray and drizzly, not a play day, and I didn't want to be observed failing. So I went out there on my own and slowly climbed up this pine tree. And if you remember as a kid what it's like to climb a pine tree, it's unpleasant. They have awful bark, and it's sticky, and they're needles. But I was determined to get to the top of that tree, and I made it to the top of that tree all by myself and looked out over the vista of a 5-year-old's conquest. Saw over the parking lot into the next complex. It was a world opened up. And I had the memorable sense of victory. Then I had to climb down. Always harder than going up, by the way. But I want to mention that tree because a few years later, when I was 9, we moved to another house in another city, and we didn't have tall trees, and I was bigger by then, but we had wonderful ornamental cherry trees. And they were just large enough that I could sit in the crook where their branches would go away. And they had wholly different bark, silvery and pleasant to behold, and had wonderful flowers. And then there was the magnolia in another house we stayed in with the great big flowers and the suffocatingly sweet fruit and smell. As you can tell, I've thought about trees a lot. In fact, when I go to California every February for a meeting, I always build in a couple of days, if I can, to find a redwood or 2. And this year I went up to Sequoia National Park, and I've got to tell you that while the Imperial Valley of California is very pleasant in late February, Sequoia National Park is at 4,000 feet and higher. It was winter there, 3 foot of snow winter. And I didn't have my winter clothes because I was spending my time in Southern California, so I had a rain jacket and a pair of gloves and a bad pair of shoes. But I went up there and went up this long road to see these magnificent trees along this mountaintop, and saw the General Grant and the General Sherman, these enormous creatures that are born from seeds smaller than acorns. I love trees. I love trees a lot. What I like about them is that they're old. No one admires a young tree. No one goes to see a stripling. Let's go out and look at those little trees. No, you want to see a big tree. You want to see an old tree, something that's been around, that's done some duty. We admire tall trees, big trees, old trees, because they're substantial. We like them. And I want to suggest that as we talk about, or as I've talked about the spirituality of growing old, that what's lacking is a sense of momentousness to age. We think of it as decline when we should be thinking of it as culmination. That we should look toward age the same way we look toward a tree, that as it gets older, it becomes more mighty, more important, more consequential, more to be sought out than the little flapping things in the breeze. We want them to be significant. Of course, we live in a society that worships youth. So much so that we are told that we can have our faces lifted and other parts of ourselves siphoned and otherwise adjusted so we can forestall the appearance of age. And we're told also how we can do certain exercises and other fine things, so we can continue to look young. Youth is what we worship in this world. And of course, when you're young, that means you look ahead and think, oh my God, I'm going to get old and saggy and decrepit. Why would I want to do that? In fact, I would imagine that some young people, if they were truly honest, would say, when you reach a certain age, when most of your life is in the past and little is in the future, what hope could you possibly have? And I think trees offer an answer both to the old and the young. Like I said, trees are always old, the really good ones. And those feelings, I think, are connected to their being old. I think the Nemirov poem is really good, to be giant and keep quiet about it, to stay in one's own place and stand for the constant presence of process, and always to seem the same, to be steady as a rock and always trembling, having the hard appearance of death with the soft, fluent nature of growth, to be so tough and take the light so well, freely providing forbidden knowledge. That's what I want age to be, and I think that's what we all want age to be, and I think it's possible if we want it to be. And I have some clues as to how that can be true if you're already old, or if you're an aspiring geezer like me, or an eventual geezer like some of you young folks. I want you to have something to look forward to. So we should be building up toward this. So here's some observations about trees that I think can apply to people as well, especially as they get old. The first one's really obvious. Really old trees have been around for a while. You stand in front of a redwood and realize it's been growing there since Jesus was a boy. That puts you in your place. And you know it'll be there long after you've vanished into the dust. That tells you something. These trees, shall we say, if they have a consciousness, have a different vantage on reality, don't they? For them, a day or a year is really quite trivial. And as I've been told and I've been experiencing, as you get older, the sense of the passage of time gets faster and faster, does it not? They say that the days are long and the years are swift. I once knew a man 20 years ago who was 95, and I said, you know, Charles, time seems to be speeding up as I get older. He says, wait till you get to my age. You know, you sneeze and you turn around and suddenly it's a whole other year has gone by. Now, this sounds like a lamentable thing, but a sense of perspective is huge. That means you're also deciding what really matters. Both trees and old people have seen more of life, how much really does change and how much really doesn't. They have perspective, as I said last week. And that's important because when you live only for the moment or for tomorrow or for your job or for the next party or for your next automobile or for the next step in your life, you end up being rather myopic, don't you? You think it's about the paycheck. You think it's about the success. You think it's about those things that are right in front of you. But the reality is you turn into an old tree, and if you're lucky, you'll turn into an old tree, that those things will all be behind you at some point, and all you'll have left is yourself.